The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by
The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is in the O'Galley section of Melbourne, Florida. Preserved as it was in the early 20th century, historic tours of the Rossiter House include antiques, artifacts, and family heirlooms. The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is available for weddings and other special events.
and by the Florida Frontiers Producer Circle, a group of community-minded businesses and individuals who understand the importance of documenting and preserving the diverse history and culture of our state. More information at myfloridahistory.org. Located in the heart of downtown Miami, the Freedom Tower was built in 1925 as the home of the Miami Daily News, the city's first newspaper. At 289 feet tall, the Miami Daily News Tower briefly stood as the tallest building in the South and is widely considered to be Florida's first skyscraper. In 1962, the Daily News Tower became the Freedom Tower as the federal government operated the site as the Cuban Refugee Center. Miami's Freedom Tower was the federal processing center for Cuban refugees in Miami from 1962 through 1974. Welcome to Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. I'm Ben Brotemarkle. Because of its close proximity to Cuba, Miami was a popular destination for thousands of Cubans fleeing political repression under Fidel Castro. This influx of immigrants after the revolution led to a cohesive Cuban community that still exists in Miami today. In 2008, the Freedom Tower was named a National Historic Landmark by the Department of the Interior.
The Freedom Tower was born as the News Tower in 1925. It was the first home of a newspaper or any local media organization in Miami, purchased by Governor James Cox and commissioned in the style of Spanish Mediterranean revival, which was so common during the 1920s land boom in Miami. This is where the Miami metropolis, Miami's oldest newspaper, became the Miami Daily News, with the first edition that broke records for being the largest newspaper issue ever published, with 504 pages.
Jim Cox, who was a heavyweight in the American scene at that time, he bought the newspaper in the early 1920s, wanted to build a really noteworthy building to house it. This was the first newspaper in Miami, started publishing in May of 1896. And he hired a great architectural firm out of New York, Schultz and Weaver, who actually designed the Waldorf Astoria. They were more of a hotel design firm than anything else, but they did design a couple other office buildings in the area, including the Ingram building in more or less the heart of downtown Miami. This is on the northern perimeter of downtown Miami. And, it went up, and when it was completed in the spring of 1925, it was the tallest building. It was said it was the tallest building in the southern United States at 279 feet.
It was the tallest building in the South for a very long time. And at the very top, there was a beacon. And that beacon was used, 1925, Miami was a small community by then. That beacon was used by ships to find safe harbor in Biscayne Bay.
The Freedom Tower was one of Miami's earliest skyscrapers. It was so tall, indeed, and also given its position right across from the harbor, that it used to act as a lodestar and guide ships and boats, safely into the bay.
The building itself was designed by a architectural firm from New York, Schultz and Weaver, who were the same ones that designed the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, as well as the Biltmore Hotel here in Coral Gables in Miami, and a Biltmore Hotel that used to exist in Havana as well. The building itself is modeled after the Giralda in Seville, Spain, sort of like a Spanish Moorish style architecture.
In the 1920s, Miami was on the rise. It had just been founded in 1896. It was a young city that very quickly had attracted the appeal and the allure of ambitious entrepreneurs from all parts of the country. And we like to think that it really reflected those early aspirations, of a city that was coming to develop itself.
Well, they printed the Miami News every day. It was 7 days a week up until the mid 1960s. So everything happened there. In the back, you had where the trucks picked up newspapers for distribution through different neighborhoods and what have you, newsstands. Um, the the mezzanine level, which is the jewel of the interior of the building, was where a lot of reporters did their work and what have you. Some of the little cozy corners in the building where the high administrative staff had their offices. Then as you moved up the tower itself, you had between the mid-1930s and the mid-1950s, it was the home of WIOD, which was one of the earliest radio stations.
This was not a very practical building for a newspaper operation. For all of its beauty and its architectural grandeur, the daily operations of a full newspaper staff were really challenging, within this building. It was really constrained. So in 1957, the newspaper team moved out, and it was probably for the best.
Served the Miami News until the fall of 1957 when they moved to new quarters on the Miami River, a more functional building as far as a printing operation and what have you. And so it was bought by someone, it had occupants, it wasn't totally full. Federal government came along in 1962 and leased it and called it the Freedom Tower.
The Freedom Tower acquires its name, the Freedom Tower, evolving from its earlier role as the News Tower in 1962. That's when the federal government leases the building to open the Cuban Refugee Center, where it's estimated that around 400,000 Cuban refugees came not just to be processed for political asylum, but really to be welcomed. This is where they would receive food items such as a famous peanut butter, Spam and government cheese, but also where they would see their dentist and their doctor, and a place where they could find a word of comfort or a coat. This was, a multi-floor operation where on a daily basis, a case officer could be seeing upwards of 60 newly arrived, Cuban refugees for a number of reasons. This was also the place where family reunifications took place. So it was a very emotional, chapter for the tower. It's definitely its most poignant chapter.
From 1962 to 1974, hundreds of thousands of Cuban exiles passed through the doors of the Freedom Tower. They received medical services, there was a dental clinic, people received vaccinations, as well as medical checkups. Many Cuban doctors practiced medicine here at the Freedom Tower, including Dr. Miriam Bosch and Dr. Rafael Penolver. Right where we're sitting in this room was squared off by temporary walls. Many people waited hours here in this space to receive services at the Freedom Tower.
It was interesting coming to El Refugio. And so the first thing I wanted to say is that think about that name that the Cubans gave this building. If you translate that to English, it literally means the refuge. So you know how the Freedom Tower is often compared to Ellis Island, and it's the Ellis Island of the South. And it was a lot more than that, because in Ellis Island, you arrived here and you were processed and you left, and that was it. In our case, for the hundreds of thousands of Cubans who came through the Freedom Tower, it was not a question of just coming here and being processed. It was a question of you would come here to El Refugio for everything. You came for your food stamps. You came for your stipend. You came for food staples. You came for medical care. And the visits were frequent sometimes.
I recall there was a school bus that would pick us up right from the tarmac and bring us directly here to this building. And once inside this building, We went through all kinds of, medical checkups, dental checkups, assistance programs, and so forth. But it was a very traumatic experience. Well, I was scared. I didn't speak the language. I arrived in this very room that we're in right now, the Great Hall, and it's cavernous. And you're a 5-year-old little boy. You're with your parents. My older brother was with us, and you find yourself in this cavernous room. People speaking a strange language. They're moving you from room to room. They're giving you, inoculating you. They're giving you the infamous immigrant badge that all immigrants have on their left shoulder. And then dentists, my first fillings were here. They gave us some food assistance. I recall, everybody recalls the government cheese. Everybody that walks through these doors, that walked through these doors in the 1960s, the one thing they say is government cheese, a huge block of government cheese.
And in my case, as a little child, walking into this majestic building was like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just so big. It was always so full of people. You would catch snippets of conversations here and there, everything in Spanish. And you would hear people talking about their own particular situation, talking about family members that they were trying to bring over, talking about, oh, I need more food stamps, or I need a bigger stipend. It was a very interesting experience to come in here as a child, and you understood some of what was going on, but you did not really understand everything that was going on and really how dire the situation was for everybody who was here.
There's one room where the processing room is upstairs in the second floor. And there's what's called La Pizarra de la Suerte, the board of luck. And there they would list jobs that would be available. And so we did receive assistance in, I believe we received something to the effect of monetary assistance of $80 a month. Wait, we're talking 1967. That was pretty decent money in 1967.
Without the aid that we got from El Refugio, from the Freedom Tower, I don't see how we would have been able to pay rent or buy the food that we needed. My brother was a young man, a teenager, and he would go to school during the day, and he would, of course, work part-time jobs, but that was definitely not enough. When you clean an office at night and you get paid minimum wage, how do you support a family with that? How do you support a family with taking in piecemeal sewing? So without the stipend that we received from this place, we would not have been able to make it to pay rent, to have a roof over our heads, to buy the food that we needed without the food stamps that we would get here, to have the medical assistance and care that we would get here. I mean, my mother would bring me here for all the childhood immunizations, inoculations, emergencies, everything. We would come here to El Refugio.
With the end of the so-called freedom flights in 1973, really the influx of Cuban exiles, ceased in volume, and the justification for a large-scale federal operation at the Freedom Tower began to dwindle. It was a very distinctive moment in the 60s and 70s where Cubans were arriving, in such large numbers. There were, other moments, in early Cuba-U.S. relations where, Cubans also arrived in large numbers, for example, during the Mariel boat lift or the Balsero crisis, and more recently. But there has never been such a similar, large-scale operation providing assistance in so many different ways to this group in the same way as El Refugio.
Despite the impressive history of Miami's Freedom Tower, first as the home of the Miami Daily News and later as the processing center for Cuban refugees, by 2001, the building was named one of America's most endangered historic places by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Following an extensive renovation, Miami's Freedom Tower is now operated by Miami-Dade College as a multifaceted museum and active community center.
After El Refugio shuttered at the Freedom Tower, the building fell into disrepair. It is almost a miracle that it's still standing. It is the last remaining building of the original Biscayne Boulevard skyline. And it is thanks to the vision and the generosity and the efforts of so many that it stands to today. There was first a comprehensive restoration carried on by Saminco International, a Saudi consortium. Later on, the Mass family purchased the building in the 1990s with a mission to transform it into a museum and research center focused on the experience of the Cuban exile. Later on, the building was acquired by the Martin family and donated to Miami-Dade College, which has been the proud steward of the Freedom Tower since 2005.
The building itself, it still needed a lot of restoration work. The college embarked upon a very costly restoration. They got grant money for it. Reopened it on a limited basis for book fair, for the film festival. You had writers like Tom Wolfe, who spoke here for the book fair. They also reopened it for Constitution Day in mid-September every year. But it wasn't really until the last couple of years that they really have overhauled this.
Miami-Dade College has led a 2-year renovation and historic restoration of the Freedom Tower, supported in large measure by a generous grant from the state of Florida, and also thanks to the generosity of the community, partners and philanthropists that came together to ensure that the Freedom Tower would not only be repaired and could stand for the next 100 years, but also to reimagine how to tell the history of the Freedom Tower and to honor all that it means for our community. So the college worked through the Museum of Art and Design and the Department of Cultural Affairs with incredible partners, historians, scholars, artists, community members that came together through stakeholder groups, other archives and museums to create a multi-floor exhibition with a signature gallery called Libertad, but also the languages of migration exhibit at the Kislak Center, the We Carry Our Homes With Us opening art exhibition, and the FIFA exhibit in partnership with the FIFA Museum.
The vision of Libertad is to tell the history of this building, to honor the history of this building. And we wanted to center the voices of our community in the retelling of the history of the building. We've interviewed 400 Miamians, and while we worked with a number of noted scholars on the creation of these exhibits, it was really important to us to let the community tell their own stories.
Libertad is a very special exhibition that encompasses 2 floors at the Freedom Tower. It includes, for example, a documentary introductory film about the history of the building, which we developed in conjunction with the Miami Film Festival and local filmmakers, as well as the exhibition design firm Local Projects. It also includes El Refugio in Context, which is an area that seeks to recreate the El Refugio space, from the tiles and the chairs to the desk to the board of luck, which is a bulletin board where Cuban refugees could find job listings and other opportunities, or read the newsletters that were published regularly at the Freedom Tower, which were Oportunidades and Resettlement Recap. It is an attempt to bring visitors as close as possible to the experience of arriving in the Freedom Tower in the 60s or 70s.
We also have an exhibition titled Languages of Migration, which is both an ode to our history as the Miami Daily News and the Cuban Refugee Center. That exhibition includes ancient and colonial art of the Americas from what we now know as Peru, Mexico, Bolivia, as well as contemporary artists like Pepe Mar and Edouard Duval-Carrier. We like to look at this exchange of ideas across time and space. With languages of migration, we're thinking about the movement of people, the movement of ideas, and the movement of signs and symbols. We also have on view an exhibition titled We Carry Our Homes With Us, which is a contemporary art exhibition. We took the title from Maricela Vega's memoir, We Carry Our Homes With Us. Maricela was resettled through the Freedom Tower. That exhibition includes internationally renowned artists.
This building no longer just represents the Cuban diaspora, but the immigrant experience of the city of Miami. And one of the ways I explain that is if you go to the fourth and fifth floor, we have the FIFA Museum. Well, soccer is not a Cuban sport. Our sport is baseball, which we call baseball, but soccer is not it. It is more Latin American sport. And we have two entire floors dedicated to that particular sport. And I explain to people it's because Miami has become, over the last 40, 50 years, a world-class international city. And the story begins, the first chapter begins with the Cuban diaspora. But thereafter, we have the Colombians, which is the second largest group in Miami. We have the Nicaraguans, who also fled communism and came here in the 1980s. We have Peruvians. We have the Haitian community, which is significant here in Miami as well. And it all began, by the way, with the Bahamian community in Coconut Grove. The very first ones here were the Bahamians. But Miami is very much a city that has been, since the 1800s, since its inception, literally built by immigrants. And here we are today, and that's why this building is still very important to us.
Miami changed with the arrival of, 500,000 Cuban refugees in the 60s and 70s. There are photographs of Miami during those times up to the 1980s by photographers like Mario Algace that show how, Cubans really not just envisioned a new city, but also brought a lot of their traditions. It was really a city that was transformed and that really earned a distinctive Cuban imprint that we can see to this day, and that, of course, has also been further transformed by the arrival of so many other members of communities from Latin America, the Caribbean, and elsewhere. It was really the beginnings of Miami's transformation into a global capital and a multicultural metropolis.
When the cruise ships right across the bay over here pull in, one of the first things they still see is the Freedom Tower, and surrounded by multi-million-dollar glass and steel modern architecture. But it's still distinguished from when you pull in, you still see it, and it's still beautiful. Some people, decry the modern architecture and the multi-million-dollar buildings. I don't. I think they serve as an interesting backdrop to this building itself from 1925, and it still shows this is where it began, and this is what was built by the different communities since.
I want visitors to take away the power of our shared humanity, the bravery that it takes for someone to share their own story with one person, much less the public. In the Freedom Tower, when you're listening to these oral histories, you can see yourself or hear yourself in them. It may not be your exact lived experience, but the personal nature in which people have shared their struggles, their triumphs, it's hard not to connect with them. And I think that speaks to our shared human experiences.
I think it's important that everybody tell their story. Cubans have a saying that todo cubano tiene una historia. And they love to talk about their exile experience. And a lot of times when you are studying history, you're studying about kings and you're studying about leaders. And you're never studying about the people that really make the world go round. The little person who does not have the limelight, does not get their moment of fame. And yet that person has something to say. A story that perhaps is going to inspire somebody, or a story that perhaps is going to make somebody else feel like, hey, I went through the same thing. I wasn't the only one that was hurting. I wasn't the only one that was suffering, or I wasn't the only one who had that same opportunity. Other people had it too. So I think it's important to share that. I think it's important to leave that legacy for the generations of people who are coming into this country still today. I think it's important that they learn that other people struggled just like they did, and that other people had to start all over again, just like they did.
Immigration can be a divisive topic in modern America, even in cases where people are fleeing oppressive political regimes or other life-threatening situations. Miami's Freedom Tower stands today as a symbol of the hope and promise of a better life that America can provide. You've been watching Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. Visit us anytime online at myfloridahistory.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ben Brotemarkle. The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by
The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is in the O'Galley section of Melbourne, Florida. Preserved as it was in the early 20th century, historic tours of the Rossiter House include antiques, artifacts, and family heirlooms. The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is available for weddings and other special events.
and by the Florida Frontiers Producer Circle, a group of community-minded businesses and individuals who understand the importance of documenting and preserving the diverse history and culture of our state. More information at myfloridahistory.org.